How's the weather, Joe?
We've actually have a very nice day. It's about 70 degrees and sunny today here in Seattle, so gotta enjoy it while we can.
Oh, that does sound nice. And you, Sam, you're in New Jersey, is that right?
I am.
Yeah.
It is mid 60s and raining today. So Joe, I
Yeah.
feel like I have the weather you should be having right now.
I've had way too much of that lately, so I'll gladly pass that on.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Well, so for those of you that are in the waiting room, we're going to give it about 30 more seconds. And we will go ahead and get started. If you all want, feel free to use that chat feature, introduce yourselves to each other and where you're from, if you're so inclined. All right. Well, we are at 3 o'clock, so I am going to go ahead and kick this off. My name is Samantha Lake. I am the COO of ProNovos. I will be your moderator today in this conversation. We are very excited to be joined by one of our very first clients from GLY Construction, as well as I am joined with the founder of ProNovos. So before I get started and let our subject matter experts introduce themselves, we're curious to know who you are and kind of what aspect of the industry you are serving. So I've just launched a poll that while Bruce and Joe introduce themselves, if you all would like to tell us, are you a general specialty or do you offer professional services? What best describes your role and what accounting software are you using? You have the opportunity to do that now. And I am going to let Bruce and Joe go ahead and give us a brief introduction of their roles and how they intersect in the context of technology as well as financial management. So, Joe, do you want to get started?
Sure, yeah. First of all, I want to say thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. My name is Joe Bonacci. I am the CFO at GLY Construction. Been in my role at GLY since 2016, when I was introduced to Bruce and the group at ProNovos. GLY was actually started their data journey just as I was arriving at GLY and had already engaged Bruce and his team to help us on that journey at that point in time.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Joe. And I am Bruce Orr. I'm the CEO and Chief Data Scientist at ProNovos. My role encompasses both strategic leadership and deep focus on data-driven decision making. My responsibilities are many, but it involves truly guiding our company's vision and also ensuring that we deliver cutting edge solutions. We exist to help contractors make better decisions to manage their financials. And as Joe said, we engaged in this journey early on. I think while I am very technical and Joe brings the financial acumen, I think our roles intersect significantly in the context of technology adoption and financial management. We developed the solution with Joe's guidance and GLY's guidance as well. I think that we've really uncovered some opportunities to help GLY and the industry make a big difference on that data-driven journey that Joe talked about.
Thank you both. So just so you guys have an idea of who we're speaking with today, we have a decent number of general and specialty contractors with us, predominantly executives and financial managers. And they use a variety of different accounting softwares. And so, Joe, just I guess all is fair. You all were using CMIC, correct?
We just converted to CMIC over the last couple of years. We were on Sage prior to that. Um, the Sage 300. So we converted to CMIC over the last couple of years as part of our journey.
Perfect. Well, that's thank you for teeing this up for me. That's actually my first question for you. So, I think a lot of people are joining us today because, construction is in this interesting role of trying to leverage technology to modernize their operations, streamline efficiencies, and really use it as a collaborative tool to bring people together. And so thinking back to 2016, what motivated GLY to embark on its tech journey, and what role has ProNovos played in that process?
Yeah, so I think that as many companies out there, specifically construction companies, we have a lot of data, but I like to call it as disjoint data, where it's in different systems, where the different systems aren't connected and they aren't necessarily talking to each other. And so the sharing of information or the access of that data is very limited, right? Or it was very limited at GLY, I should say, at that point in time. So our goal was always to be a data-driven organization, to use data to help our project teams make decisions in the field to drive results, right? So part of that was, how do we get the information? How do we get the data to the people who need it the most, in a timely manner, without having to wait, without project managers or project teams having to wait for accounting to update a report, to send it to them, for them to be able to do what they need to do to send it back to analyze the data, right? So we wanted to speed up that whole process and provide data timely to people in the field to help them make decisions as they're building buildings, right, with schedules and budgets and all that, moving forward from an operational standpoint. So I think that, and not only that is, but, help project teams move their projects forward, but then also help us roll that information up from a corporate standpoint, provide more timely information to executives and the like. So we were looking at data as not just something from a financial standpoint, but how can we really use this in the field to impact decisions that happen on a day-to-day basis in the field to drive the results we want from that perspective, is really kind of high level.
And
Hey, Sam.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. You're asking the questions, but I do have one question for Joe. As I'm listening to him and reflecting on other conversations that I have had with other contractors, the sentiment normally is, we have a lot of data that is underutilized, but I think we could do something with it. Joe, I assume that GLY had a similar thought related to the information that they had. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's spot on.
What's different, and one of the reasons why I early on gained a lot of respect for GLY, is because you guys had that thought, but you said, let's do something about it. And Joe, I think with your background, you said it can be done. We just need to partner with a company to help us do it. And because you were sitting on a lot, Sage 300, you guys used it for a long time, and you have other applications that you guys were using and fed these applications and had like this treasure trove of information. And I applaud you guys for saying, we're going to commit to doing this. And here we are now, years later, using it to make decisions.
Yeah, I think that what kind of drove that a little bit, Bruce, also is that, from an executive team and executive leadership team, we have access to some of our, business partners that we work very closely with. And we've got introduced to some of the stuff that they were using in other industries. And we're looking at this going, wow, if they can use it here, how do we develop this, and how do we do it for ourselves to really help us at the end of the day, right? So just taking some lessons learned from some other, strategic partners that we work with, and seeing what they were doing, and then trying to figure out how can we do that for ourselves here with, like you said, this, trove of data that, just kind of, how do we use it? How do we use it and make it work for us at the end of the day?
And
Yeah.
Joe, that's a great point. That was kind of the next thing I wanted to point out, is in our previous conversations, it's not just the financial data. You gave us a really great example of like the safety data. Could you share that with the group, and how you looked at safety data to find trends and predictive analysis?
Yeah, so, our man hours work. So we're a specialty contractor. We do a lot of our own self-performed labor. We're a union contractor. So we have access to a lot of man hours when those man hours are happening, where they're in overtime, days of the week when that's happening. And, we started looking at data from a perspective of near misses or when did injuries happen, and trying to figure out if we could see if there was a specific time of the day or if there was a specific day of the week or if it was right before a holiday. So just kind of trying to look through when things were happening to kind of preemptively, have conversations with individuals if there were certain tasks that were being performed when things were happening from that perspective, to kind of just get an idea of, okay, what can we do from a safety perspective to kind of preempt some of these things from happening, and if we can find some trends within the data. Right. So it's not only from a financial standpoint, but there's also other aspects of this from the company's perspective. And that's what we were kind of really trying to look at. And being a financial guy, the financial side of it is the most important thing. I don't want anybody to think that it's not, but there's other uses for the data that's out there also.
Yeah. Well, that actually works perfectly, kind of for our next transition for this next question is, one of your biggest data-driven initiatives was your coming to ProNovos to work with you for labor reporting. So what can you tell us about the reason for the labor report? What challenges did you observe, and what were you hoping to get out of that solution?
Yeah, so being especially contract, labor reporting and productivity is one of the most important things we can track, and just kind of analyzing crews and equipment and utilization from the equipment standpoint, how quickly crews are doing things in the field. So with that, we're trying to capture quantities in the field and hours worked, right, to kind of come up with the production rate. So before, you could probably manage, as you can imagine, we had a pretty good system in place, but we try to do our labor reporting on a weekly basis for our field crews. So what we were looking for was something a little bit more real time that we could integrate with Sage at the time, that could pull the hours worked and then have us forecast the future hours worked in quantities to get us to the end of the job. And that was one of the biggest things we were looking for, especially as you're doing concrete, productivity is probably one of the biggest things you can measure from that perspective. So we were looking for a tool that we could really use in the field with our foremen and our soups, our general foreman and our soups, to actually have them use a tool to forecast out labor. But not only that, but we were looking at crew sizes, looking at multiple crews versus overtime, when does it make sense to work the overtime, and just looking at a tool that could help us analyze data and give us trends. As we're getting through a learning curve, as we're starting new projects, we're getting through that learning curve. What has our production rate been, at the beginning, and what are we anticipating at the end, right? So we were just looking for a system to help us kind of analyze the data and what we were seeing in the field to help us, plan out the work as we move forward.
And there's going to be a learning curve to this, correct? I think you gave some examples. Do you want to share how you had to kind of get over that learning curve?
Yeah, so I mean, when construction, parking garage, or you're doing a high rise, it's a concrete building. The first couple floors you're coming out of the ground, or you're getting at, you're going to have a learning curve, and as you go up a building, you think it's going to be quicker as you go up, right? So how do you build that into your labor forecasting? What does that look like? And then are you actually achieving that learning curve that you had anticipated when you first got into it, right? So those were some of the things we're trying to learn. Utilization of equipment, like if we had equipment that was sitting out on a project site, how long was it sitting idle before it was being utilized again, right? Because that's a lost opportunity. So just looking at ways to kind of take this data that we had and use it to help us be strategic as we're planning out our projects. I think that we've been doing this for a long time, as many contractors are, and many people are very good at it. But a lot of times what we had experience was there's a gut feel, or the superintendents or the guys in the field, they've been doing it for so long that they just kind of anticipated that this is what was going to happen and this is what they, were anticipating. It was nice to actually have data or analytics to kind of actually back that up. I think one of the biggest concerns we have as an organization is, an aging workforce, right? And then how do you pass on that expertise to the younger generation and keep that expertise going throughout the organization? And if we can use data and analytics and information to help translate some of that information to the up and comers, then, that's another one for us as an organization.
Bruce,
Yeah.
did you have anything to add to that?
You know, I'm sitting here listening to Joe, and I gotta say, when I heard you, maybe it was you, Sam. No, it was you, Joe. You said back in 2016. I was like, has it really been that long? 20? Oh my gosh, that's been a while. And if I reflect back on this journey that we embarked upon, there are some things that I'm not sure if you were aware of, Joe, but ProNovos at that time was a startup, and GLY is then. I mean, you guys have grown like crazy, but GLY was a very stable company that is well respected, and I remember it was Andy Huff. He was the director of IT. And Andy said, "Gosh, Bruce, you guys are started." And by the way, I'm the founder. I didn't say that early on, but I'm the founder of ProNovos. And Andy said, you guys might not be around. So how can we ensure that you're going to be around? And we work some things in. The only reason why I'm bringing that up is because there is so much that I've learned about the intricacies related to how information is consumed. And I'll never forget that the very first time I heard someone use the term data culture and changing data culture was at GLY. And prior to 2016, I was in other industries, big industries that use data to make decisions. So it wasn't foreign to me. It was just a bit foreign to me that it wasn't being done in construction. And I think one of the reasons why it wasn't utilized, and it's not utilized as much as it should be, is because of lack of access to tools to get to the data and lack of commitment to using those tools to make decisions. So that whole term, changing your data culture, I think has been something that I've played over and over again in other conversations, because I know where you all are now is where many contractors are trying to get to. So, again, I'm just kind of reflecting on the early days. And since then, we've learned a lot. We've grown. The platform is, gosh, night and day from when we first started. But I owe my thanks to GLY for actually teaching me. And what's really interesting is talking about the ecosystem, how you all have many trade partners. Just so happens some of the clients that we started to bring on were trade partners at GLY. And what I would hear is, "Oh, you work with GLY? Oh yeah, you guys must be good," and I think that it was really very lucky for us to partner with a company as good as GLY to help us set a foundation like we have now. It's being adopted by a lot of other contractors, but it did start with the data-driven initiative that you talked about, which was, I think it was a labor report. And there's a whole lot of things around the milestones that I love to share, but I don't want to get ahead of myself, Sam.
Yeah. So, thinking about this and where you're at today, Joe, things are great. You have a great solution in place, but you didn't get here overnight. And so I was hoping that you could share some of those challenges that you all faced in integrating your technology into your financial processes. Because if there's one thing we know that this is not easy, and it takes time and patience. So could you share a few of those lessons learned with the audience?
Yeah, I think, going back to the labor report, is we brought in those foremen, we brought in those superintendents, and we brought them into the process and actually had them help us design the labor report specifically to help them in the field. We really wanted to build the system with the end user in mind to make sure we were giving them a tool that was going to help them, right? We didn't want to develop a tool that was just going to be something that they had to do. We wanted to develop a tool that was going to, make them be something they could use to help them make decisions on a daily basis in the field. So we really wanted to get their input, what they were looking for. It was a numerous iterations of the labor report. We tried a couple different things, what worked, what didn't work. There was too much data, there wasn't enough data, right? But to make sure that we developed it with the end goal or what they were trying to do in mind at the end of the day. Just as important was the rollout. Sometimes people in the field are very reluctant to change. They don't understand why they have to do something different. So if we were going to make that change as an organization, we wanted to make sure that the change was going to be seamless for them, that they were going to see the benefit of them, and that it wasn't going to be something that leadership or the executives were rolling out or saying that they had to use. It was more of, we wanted to be peer-to-peer interactions. So one of the biggest things we did is we had those same foremen and superintendents who are part of the process of building the labor report be the ones who are actually training and using the system and help us roll it out in the field. It's one thing for people to listen to a CFO like myself say, hey, you got to use this and here's the benefits of it. But when it's a trusted peer in the field that they've been, in the trenches with, that they respect, that they look up to, and they're the ones who are helping provide this training and this platform and this report and show them how it's going to benefit them, I think was a major win for us at the end of the day. And, we got some additional feedback through that, and it helped us just improve the labor reporting, the process, how we claimed quantities, some different things. So, there was a lot of learning going on during this process also. And that's the one thing that I loved about ProNovos and the platform was that there's a lot of flexibility in there, and we could kind of change on the fly, and we could look at some different reporting. Or, I don't know how many times, we'd be sitting in a meeting and we say, our field guys would be like, hey, it'd be great if we could see this information. And, Bruce and the team, our internal team here, and Bruce's team would go away, and a week later they'd come back and say, hey, is this what you guys were looking for? And it'd be like, yeah, they pulled up a cool little graph that kind of showed them their trends, very easy to understand, and then the manpower reports or manpower forecast moving forward, the quantity, so very easily get a productivity rate. So just a lot of iterations and flexibility, right? I think that's what we're really looking for, because a lot of times you go into these things and thinking you have it, hey, this is the way it's got to be, and then as you're rolling it out, you find out that we didn't think of everything, even though we thought we had. There's other things that come out, especially if when you're dealing with things that happen in the field on a day-to-day basis, that not everything's always the same.
And I want the listeners to understand too the complexity as well of what you're bringing in. I mean, you were bringing in safety data, project data, financials, HR, payroll. And one of my key takeaways from our conversations has always been it's been people first, right? Your ultimate goal is to give people not only access to information in one place, but giving it to them in a way that they can actually use it. And so, we talked about there's a lot of big systems out there, and you were struggling with finding a system that was already created that would do this. And so, could you just briefly talk about, the innovative idea you all kind of came up with Bruce for the data warehouse?
Yeah, so to your point exactly, is many companies out there like us, there's a lot of different systems that do a little bit of something well, but not one system we found that does it all well, right? So you're pulling information from a lot of different systems and trying to tie it together to provide that kind of access and that project dashboard, if you will, for the projects at the end of the day. So Bruce and the team had, came to us with the idea of the data warehouse, which was pulling all of our systems together, pulling all our data out of our separate systems, putting them into the warehouse on the platform, and then being able to do dashboards and reporting out of this specific system, which was great because we didn't have to worry about integrating different systems and having one system upgrade and the other one, what does that do with the integrations and all that. So it was kind of a way for us to work around kind of our native systems that we had and not have to worry about connecting the systems to each other. We could connect them all to this warehouse and then extract the data and use the data within the warehouse. So I think it was a very great solution that we came up with, and kudos to Bruce and the team for helping us through that. We've used that platform and continue to build off of it to this day.
And Bruce, for anybody listening now who is having the same problem as GLY, who's thinking like, we've all heard about the Power BIs and things like that, which are very expensive and they require you to have a specialist on staff to be able to manage it. So, to anybody listening, can you explain to them, what this data warehouse concept is and how it's different from something like Power BI?
Yeah. So I look at the data warehouse as more of like a utility. So it's like your energy for your house. You could put a light bulb in one room and then put a chandelier in the other room, but they're all using the same sort of source, right? And the data warehouse is a utility for that. When you are entering data into an ERP, it goes into the application, into a database, but it's pretty much siloed from any other applications that you have, whether it's safety or it's a CRM application. And when you stop and you think about it, you are basically either you've purchased a software that is probably on premise. A lot of people are moving to the cloud, but you can't own that data. That's your data. So why not take this data and put it into this utility so that you could use it however you like? A great example is GLY. They were on Sage 300 when we met. They migrated to CMIC. The constant through all of that was the data warehouse, that utility. And I think that for any company that is believing that having access to information is going to be the one of the one things that helps them become more competitive, then you should start investigating a data warehouse. Whereas a Power BI is just an application that you put on top of a data warehouse, or you could, suck up spreadsheets, which we don't want to do that. We're not going to talk about spreadsheets, but yeah, a data warehouse is more of a utility that allows any other applications to sit on top of it for the visual aspects.
And Bruce, thinking about your perspective of both, CEO of ProNovos and a chief data scientist, what were some of those critical milestones in this relationship with GLY? And how do you think that they've impacted GLY's approach to financial management?
Okay, so one of the early milestones was the implementation, as Joe said, the implementation of the labor report. I think it showcased GLY's distinctive method of managing their data and their frequency of their reporting. Unlike many other organizations that might report monthly or biweekly, GLY, they were reporting on a weekly basis. And this frequent reporting was instrumental in driving their projected final cost, allowing them to make timely and informed decisions based on current data. I think that our collaboration evolved when we saw some success around that, and we moved towards pulling in other data like GL data, and by consolidating this data, I think GLY gained a comprehensive view of their operations and financial performance across projects. I believe this holistic approach enabled them to optimize like equipment use, better management of projects, improve overall efficiencies. I don't want to say that it is the technology that drove that, because what sets GLY apart is their unique and proactive way that they embrace the technology. They didn't just adopt the new tools for the sake of it. They ensured that there was a strong buy-in from their leadership team. And I think that this top-down support was crucial for fostering a data-driven culture, a culture of innovation and openness to change within the organization, which I know that some leaders in construction companies might struggle with that. But what I love about being on this webinar with you is there's a success story, and I think that success story can be replicated over and over again when you have the buy-in and you have the leadership and you have the right technology partners, and you measure. You know, I'll go back to one of the most used movies in the business, and it's Moneyball. But I love it because it's true. You know, you start measuring certain performance, and you can start impacting the change that you want to see. So does that answer your question, Sam?
It does, and you actually set this up nicely for kind of what inspired this webinar. You know, both you and Joe have talked a lot about, you know, getting buy-in, having some of those key champions and stakeholders in the rollout process. And for anybody listening to this webinar, this is what I'm most passionate about. It's the change management aspect of technology. And so when we were up there in November, Joe and I were chatting about this topic, and he had some really insightful ways in which GLY has helped with the organizational adaptation of technology. What I will caution everybody on this webinar with is please don't ever go out and buy technology thinking it's going to solve your problems. Like, there is no magic wand. There's not a silver bullet. You have to be intentional with your technology. You know, I've spoke often on having a technology roadmap, understanding your tech stack, making sure you understand how all of these different elements play together, and really taking some time to think through it. Like what Joe was mentioning, getting people to give them feedback. How do you want this to look? How would you use it? Because if you try to take a top-down approach and you buy a technology and you isolate the people that are going to need to use that technology, you're going to face resistance. And it's going to be a struggle. And so, you know, as much as ProNovos wants to sell our solution, we want to do it intentionally with you all. And we want you all to think through this. Get your PMs on these calls, have conversations with them, and make sure that you have their buy-in, because if not, even the greatest technology won't work if nobody's using it. So with that said, Joe, you know, what were some of the strategies that GLY used to overcome resistance to change within the company?
You know, it's more of that, you know, the ground up approach, right? Not the top down. We wanted to really make sure people feel like they had a voice in the process, right? I mean, our culture is very important to us, and our people are our culture at the end of the day, right? So we wanted to make sure that there was a voice and they had some control, you know, some say in how we develop this, right? Because then at the end of the day, they are the end users. I'm not the end user. The executives aren't the end users. The people in the field on a daily basis are the end user. So then it's got to be a tool that they want to use at the end of the day, right? So help to have them help develop it. I think the other thing too is we're very cautious about too much change too quickly, right? So really being thoughtful about how much change as an organization we can take on at a time. You know, because you don't want to take on too much at a time. It's going to completely upset the apple cart, and that's not what we were trying to do at the end of the day, right? We were very thoughtful and very, you know, strategic about when we deploy technology, and make sure that not only, to your point about technology, is you have your processes right. Technology doesn't fix broken processes. At the end of the day, you have to look at your processes and figure out how to use the technology and improve your processes at the end of the day. So it's just this whole process, what I would say is kind of, I go back to flexibility. It's a learning process at the end of the day. You think you know what you're looking for, and then you get into it, and you have to be flexible and adaptable and make sure that you're providing a solution that people are going to want to use as an end user at the end of the day. And that's, you know, kind of the approach that we've taken from our perspective. And it seems to have worked very well, with, you know, just because of the adoption we've had in the field with some of the stuff we rolled out.
So once you rolled it out, though, was it that top-down approach? I think you guys had a very special way in which you roll out technology.
No, we roll out tech. It's that peer-to-peer training. It's that peer-to-peer use. We have you know, we have people in the field that are subject matter experts on the tool, but they understand what happens in the field too, right? So they understand when you're putting together a man-loaded schedule, what that means, and how the information, the data that you're seeing translates back to that schedule and what they need to do to maintain the schedule, right? So it's using those, not only the people understand the technology, but they understand what happens in the field to help bridge the gap between the people who might not be as technologically savvy, but really understand the field piece of it, right? And then it's the consistent follow-up. It's just not a roll-up, here's your training, go do it. It's that consistent follow-up time and time again. We wanted to make sure with some of our larger projects, the weekly labor reporting, that we had not only a subject matter expert in the field, we had, an IT person there to help them to make sure that, the technology and everything was working the way it was supposed to, that they weren't getting frustrated because they couldn't find a button. Just want to make it as seamless at the end of the day for those end users so that they don't become frustrated with, they have to do something different that they've been doing for the last, 20 years or whatever that might be. So it's just a very thoughtful, like consistent way of rolling things out, making sure people feel supported as you're rolling this out to them.
And my previous career, I was in training and development, and I especially love what you all did with this. I did it in a previous role when we were rolling out a new CRM tool. So can you talk about the approach that you took to training? Specifically when you did your ERP, I think that was the most interesting approach you guys had.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, an ERP system is, you're basically, to the utility, you're changing the infrastructure of your company at the end of the day, if you look at it from that perspective. So we were very intentional about a year before our go live to start getting people excited about the benefits of the new system, how it's going to improve their lives. But we also started doing some just initial rollout training well ahead of when the ERP was going to go live, just so people weren't wary of it or didn't feel comfortable with it at the end of the day. So we actually did consistent training for up to a year before, and then followed up with training. We actually put people in a dev environment versus a production environment, let them go in and run projects how they would, in a real regular production environment, and just make sure that we had the right resources so that if they couldn't do something in the system, they had the right person to reach out to help kind of walk them through the different pieces. Very hands-on type of approach with training at the end of the day versus, the big classroom setting where you got one instructor with 30 people in there who's just walking through the button clicks and stuff. So we much smaller groups, more one-on-one, one-on-two type training type atmosphere, or project teams at a time. We get project teams, we go out, we sit with the project team, with the subject matter experts, and walk them through a specific process within the system. Being very intentional to make sure people feel comfortable, because I think a lot of the times you get the reluctance to change is people don't feel comfortable with what they're doing, or they don't know what they're doing or how they're doing it. So you have to overcome that uneasiness in the individuals. And what we found is that individualistic, that smaller group approach worked very well.
And just to kind of put a nice bow on what you said for the listeners, think about human psychology. Ambiguity creates anxiety. So when you're seeing resistance to things, there's a psychological impact. It's not necessarily that your workforce is being defiant. They're probably anxious because they don't understand. And we have been trained in society not to raise our hand and say, I don't understand, for fear of drawing attention to ourselves. So look for some of those key indicators when you're seeing this resistance, and ask yourself, have I really stopped and properly trained my workforce to understand this? Another thing to consider as well is the human brain. You all have been on this webinar with us for 37 minutes. We're coming to about the end of what your attention span is going to be. On average, they can only take about 60 minutes of information. And then there's also the 80-20 rule. 80% of the information should be information they already have some sort of context or understanding of, and you're only hitting them with 20% of new information. So I love that you guys took this bite-sized small approach to training so you didn't overwhelm them. And you also had continuous learning to make sure that they actually were retaining it and they could practically apply it. A lot of times, I think this goes to your next point that you're going to make, is about there's a deadline, right? And so things just get rushed. And so how did you overcome that concept of, not just doing things for the sake of a budget or hitting a timeline? How did you make sure you rolled this out to make sure they were actually ready?
Well, it comes back to conversation at the executive level, being very intertwined from the executives, understanding that, hey, this is not a simple, like the ERP was not a simple task. It's basically redoing the whole infrastructure of a company and how that works, right? So we wanted to make sure that we were ready to flip the switch and move forward with the new system before, we didn't want there to be any issues. I mean, of course there's issues and things that happen that you're not expecting, but we wanted to be as ready as possible. And we just constant conversation with me and my business partners to say, hey, we understand that we've got a budget, we have a deadline of when we want to make this happen, but we also got to be realistic about if we roll out a product that doesn't work, the backlash associated with that, right? So we were very intentional from our perspective to make sure that, we were within budget, but we wanted to make sure that if that budget got extended a little bit, it's too important for our organization at the end of the day to have it be driven by a budget, especially when you're talking about company culture, impacts to individuals on a daily basis, that anxiety level you were talking about. So we wanted to make it as seamless as possible. So it's really my job to make sure that the executives that I, work with on a daily basis understood that we weren't going to go live until we were absolutely sure that we were going to be ready to go live and that we could support the system in a way that we could get past some of those frustrations that were naturally going to come up. I've been through the opposite end of that where, you've been 6 months over deadline and someone says, well, we just got to get it out there. Right. And for me, that's just such a negative impact on the organization and the company culture at the end of the day that it's more detrimental to the system if it's not ready, especially as you're trying to, because it goes back to change management at the end of the day. You got to manage that aspect of it. And that other approach for me just doesn't feel right.
And I mean, I feel like we could have an entire webinar just on this topic, but for the sake of time, we're going to move it along. And I'm curious to hear from our audience. So we are, I'm trying to launch another poll. Interesting. Let me see if I can, here we go. All right, so here's the poll. So thinking about your company, who is the most resistant to new technology in your organization? Is it the accounting department? Is it the C-suite? Is it your field team? Is it IT or is it operations? So Joe, I guess I don't want to put you on the spot. Just thinking about your experience in your career, not necessarily GLY, but in your experience, any thoughts on who tends to be the most resistant to new technology?
I think there's different levels of resistance between the different departments. When it like labor reporting for us, it was definitely the field because now you're taking something. I mean, if you've got a soup who's been doing something for 15 to 20 years a certain way, he's used to it. So I think with the labor reporting for us, it was definitely within the field. With our ERP system, I would say it was operations, right? Because there was complete change of their processes and procedures and how they were used to doing things. But it's all about how you manage that. And for us, for operations, it was, well, you're gonna have access to information. You're gonna have information at your fingertips. Hey, look at the cool stuff you can do now without having to rely on your accounting department. So it's kind of like how you lay that out and how you go that. But I mean, I can see every one of those different departments dependent on the company.
And you can see, I love that we do have a lot of construction financial professionals on this call, and not one of them said it was their department. So that is encouraging that this audience is open-minded and they're ready to tackle the technology gaps within their organization. So. All right, well, let's move along. And when you think about the benefits that you all have realized from your investment in technology, Joe, what are some of those things that you can share with the group? So we've obviously heard it's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of people management, it's a lot of thought, but when you get it right and it all starts coming together, what are some of the benefits and the ROIs that you've experienced?
I think the biggest one for us is just transparency with some of the stuff we do with some of our clients at the end of the day, right? Some of the information that we're able to provide and present to our clients is really helpful to them. I think that sometimes in our industry, there's a little bit of a behind the curtain type feeling. And so it's actually created some transparency between us and our clients at the end of the day, which I think is great. Not only that, we're starting to see some different behaviors in the field based on information that's been provided, right? or different conversations happening based on just having access to data, right? Whether it's validating that gut feel or completely saying, well, that's what my gut told me, but now the data is telling me something different, right? So it changes the way we approach some of the stuff that we do in the field. It changes the way we manage our equipment, if you will, from that perspective to get a better ROI from that perspective. So, I mean, obviously there's financial results based on some of the access to information, but I think all of these auxiliary things just make us a better organization at the end of the day. And that is hard to really measure at the end of the day. I think the other biggest thing that we wanted to get away from is we wanted to get away from data entry per se, and we want to make people more analytical, right? So there's efficiencies that are gained by not having people just do data entry, but they get the information presented to them and then they can think based on the information presented to them, right? And that's kind of what we were really hoping to achieve. I don't know if you can really put an ROI on that, but there's a lot there that's hard to put a dollar figure on.
Yeah, I think one thing in our pre-conversations is you talked about the PMs, right? Like they're more in tune with their billings and change management. So I mean, I guess there probably are some efficiencies there with, your clients paying sooner because now your PMs have this visibility into, what's going on, whereas before it was probably all locked up in other systems.
Yes. I mean, based on the information was presented to us, we were able to change our billing practices, right, for more efficiencies and to help streamline that whole process. So, yeah, to your point, there's a lot there.
Mhm. And how great does it feel with you and your team not being the middle person to having to give everybody this data?
Yeah. I mean, there's the self-sufficient piece from the PMs and the operations teams and be able to have the information readily available at their fingertips is the biggest win through this whole process.
Awesome. And Bruce, I know we get asked this question a lot, and to Joe's point, it might be hard to, but when people are asking, how do you quantify the ROI of technology solutions? Do you have any metrics or any success factors that you could share with the listeners today to help them get a better understanding of what they can expect when they do technology right?
I was told a while back that construction is an industry that has an incredible amount of waste. As a matter of fact, I think it was even broken down to saying like a third of every dollar is wasted. And I remember seeing that and doing research to try to understand where the waste happens. And what I found, and I was actually able to corroborate this with some other leaders and researchers in the industry, but it is related to the amount of rework that happens, the amount of change orders, and one of the things that stuck out was the amount of time people are spending looking for information. And that time that you spend is time that you can get back. Now, what you choose to do with the time once you get it back is up to you. But as Joe said, he wanted the organization to get out of the practice of data entry and data manipulation and put on their analytical hats. I think that when you have information at your fingertips and you're not spending your time and your brain power trying to manipulate the data, but you're using your brain power to look at, say, a dashboard and say, okay, this is the discovery that I've made. How can I use this information to change the outcome that I am unhappy with right now? And I think that it's very, very difficult to measure that, but I believe that the best way you could go about this is just try to find efficiency gains. And once you're able to find the efficiency gains, then I would say go to the next level. And if you're experiencing any margin fades on jobs, take a check on what your average fade is before you implement something, and then come back a year later and see if that has changed. Hopefully, what you've done is you've gotten the data in your hands, you've understand what is causing the margin fade, and you're implementing change so that there is a difference. The technology is working for you. You are making more money. Your people are less stressed because they're not entering data. They got their time back. They're home for dinner at an hour that is reasonable. So, yeah.
And Bruce, I'll add something for, anybody listening. I've talked to several people doing R&D for ProNovos, and oftentimes I will hear them say like, well, time savings and efficiency is not something my CEO cares about. They don't care how long it takes us to do a job, but they work 12 hours. But Bruce, you bring up a great point about the culture, about giving people time back, and then think about what that does to their overall acumen. They're now not spending all of this time compiling the data. They actually now have time to analyze the data. I have heard people that have used our software, they've seen trends with like submittals. So they built that into their strategic plan, and then they measured it a year later. They gave everybody goals. Joe, to your point, looking at safety data, looking at trends, like if you make it easier and more accessible for people to have data, you're going to see an elevation in their thinking. You're going to be able to create more autonomy. So it's not just about the time savings, it's about the overall impact on that individual and what it frees them up to do in the organization versus just the compiling of the data. So we're gonna move on. I'm gonna launch our last poll as Bruce and Joe kind of share a few lessons learned and best practices. So if what you've heard today is of interest to you and you're curious about ProNovos, we'd be happy to put you in touch with one of our solutions engineers just so you can look around, ask us any questions you might have. But as people answer that poll, Joe, I guess I will ask you this, when thinking about your technology journey, what are some of those lessons learned that other contractors seeking to modernize their financial management technology should take into consideration?
Well, the first thing I would say is it's not easy. It takes time. The organization has to be dedicated and committed to transforming themselves to a data-driven organization, right? And it's not a process that happens overnight. I think we mentioned earlier on the call that we started this process in 2016, right? And here we are in 2024, and I still think we're still on this journey. We're not fully there at the end of the day, right? So it's a process and it takes time, and you just have to be patient with it. You got to be flexible. You have to be understanding that things are going to change, and you've got to be flexible with it. And I think the other thing is that if you're going to do this, you got to be very, very thoughtful about the culture of the organization and make sure you're not doing this at the detriment of the culture of your organization at the end of the day, right? So those were, I mean, for lessons learned for me, and what like if I were, as we're going through this, as we continue to go through this, those are the things that are kind of front of mind for me at the end of the day that I talk through with my executive team all the time.
Awesome. And then Bruce, same question to you, based on your experiences working with GLY and some other industry players, what are some best practices that the audience should consider to maximize the benefits of technology?
I can speak from a analytics partner. I think that early on, I would always tell Joe and team whenever we meet, like you should be measuring us as much as you're measuring the data. So as an analytics partner, are we providing the value that you need? Are you able to see the change? And I would say that my lesson learned has been that you can't just rest on your laurels. Like, I think that you have to be the best that you can be in terms of your craft, and and you have to listen to the partner and truly understand the challenges that they're having, because there's a word that I latched onto early on that helped me drive a lot of the decisions from a technology perspective, and it was empathy. So when you have let's talk about the field. When you have users in the field that's trying to get their job done and they have to use technology, they're not doing this because they love technology. They want to get their job done. So it has to be easy. It has to be fast. And I think that level of empathy for the people in the field helped us try to be the best that we can be at providing good information to the end user and help them measure their success as they execute their projects. So that was my lesson learned, is just, listen to your partners and make sure that everyone understands what the end goal is.
Perfect. And then final thoughts. So thinking about, where we're at in future outlooks, how do you envision the role of technology evolving in the construction industry? And what opportunities or challenges do you foresee? So Joe, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I think from my perspective and just looking at it from GLY's lens is, data is not something that's going away. It's going to be there, and our biggest focus is how do we use that data? How do we harness that data to help our individuals be better at the end of the day, right? So we're constantly looking for ways to improve, to create efficiencies, to make sure that we're providing the, best tools for the individuals who are doing this on a day-to-day basis at the end of the day, right? So from our perspective, it's not something that's going away. It's something we have to invest in. We'd like to be in the forefront of it, but just knowing that it's going to be there, it's going to consistently be there. And we've been challenged by, some of our clients to provide more data and more analytics. So how do we, provide them what they need while driving our organization forward is kind of our biggest challenge, I would say.
And Bruce, what about you?
I think that for any forward-looking technology company in this day and age, you can't talk about future outlooks without talking about AI. And I think that that for us, one of the things that we've been focused on is how to best deploy AI in a responsible way. I see that many companies are trying to just add some sort of integration, like with OpenAI, to their platform just because they feel like they have to do it. But for me, I want to make sure that when we open this up, we're doing it in a thoughtful way, and we are truly helping the end user get better and improve their efficiencies and margins using the best technology out there. So for us, AI is something that we're really looking at rolling out more and more, again, in a responsible way, not just throwing it out there and causing a bunch of havoc. So that's our future outlook.
Well, that wraps up kind of the panel conversation portion of this. I know Bruce and Joe have hit you all with a lot of information. This is the time for you to ask questions. If you're curious about anything that Joe has done or approaches he's taken or technologies used, there's a Q&A functionality built into the Zoom toolbar. So if you have a question you'd like to ask it, you are more than welcome to do so. Feel free to ask Bruce any questions about the technology. So I guess, as we wait to see if any questions come in, either of you have any questions for the other person based on what you heard today? Not to put you on the spot.
Right? I guess I'll start. Joe, you said earlier that it's not easy, and I guess based on your journey to gaining, I'm going to use a term that you love so much, but data democratization on your journey to getting there. Is there anything that you've done differently?
There's always some things I would like to go back to differently, right? But I think that goes back to the flexibility, just being able to adjust as you move forward, right? And using the right type of systems and the right type of partners to understand where things aren't going the way you want them to go and being able to adjust midstream versus just being stuck going a certain pathway and then having to continue down that pathway. So I don't know if there's anything necessarily I would say right now that I would go back and change, but the one thing I have learned through this is you got to be flexible, you've got to be able to adjust, and you've got to be able to, listen at the end of the day, right? Is listening to the end user, listening to people who are going to be using it on a day-to-day basis and make sure their needs are being met. Those are the key things that I think if you are really focused on, there's always going to be things you can go back and say, well, I wish we would have done that. It would have been cheaper. We could have cut some time off. We would have done this. But if you follow those core and you're flexible and you're listening to people through the process, you're probably going to get to the right outcome at the end of the day. Maybe that's maybe naive on it, but that's what I would say.
I think agility is key. You're right. I mean, agile development is something that is big for a reason.
Well, we don't have any other questions, but I will say for anybody who's still on, when we send you this recording, I will also include a tech roadmap worksheet that you all can use to help you just start figuring out what systems you're using, what problems you might have. It's a really good first step to just start collaborating with those within your organization and figuring out what areas technology might be beneficial to you, whether to solve a problem or move your organization forward. So thank you, Bruce and Joe, so much for your time. This was a great conversation, and we look forward to talking to you guys again soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. Thanks, Joe, for doing this.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Sam. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.